Thanks for joining me again. My name's Scott Docherty, and today we're continuing to read my book, Venger's Guide to Mastering Chaos at the Table, Run Tabletop Role-Playing Games with Confidence. If you've not picked it up yet, it's available on Amazon and vengersdecks.com, and I hope you're enjoying this. So last time we were talking about the defining backstory of random encounters and why they're hated and so on. We're now going to move on to what the beef is with random encounter tables. So this is where the idea of the fleshed out random encounter began. It was an attempt to recognise the current trend of the dungeon or game master being perceived as mainly responsible for the story. It's an attempt to redress the balance a little, to help out the dungeon or game master, whilst the techniques I lay out here, encouraging the players to step up and allow all of you to embrace more comfortably the chaos that should be inherent in the game. The approach to chaos and to encounter design and implementation that I use these days came from years and years adding meat to the bones of the random encounter tables in the reference books and modules. Although the tables are okay for encounter building, particularly for newer dungeon or game masters, and although a lot of the time they've been well designed and suited quite masterfully to the settings for which they're written, for me, I've just come to find them lacking a fair bit in inspiration. The idea behind the tables is to let you roll up a quick encounter on the fly, so you can throw at the players a bunch of monsters or experiences that fit the setting or game you're playing. Roll a 3, pull out your 2d4 wolves. Roll a 6, here come 1d12 tarasques, and so on. But does that make an encounter? In my experience, I've found that although the bare minimum information provided in random encounter tables has been designed to inspire, to help the dungeon or game master think, right, how can I use this? Oh, well I could... In fact, the lack of juice in what the table provides ends up leaving you with more work to do, with a bunch of thinking needed to try and pack with conflict whatever the table gives you, to make it engaging and entertaining and fantastically unique. And this work needs to be done quickly if it's all rolled out at the table. I mean, I do recognise that this concern might just be me, that others do find the tables inspiring and easy to slot in, and that with experience, a lot of groups can learn and blend them into their gaming and appreciate and grow more comfortable with the utter chaos of randomness. But I've seen and been engaged in so many discussions with those who've struggled to make random encounters worthwhile, and so have cast them aside for the sake of what they feel is a more structured, manageable, and therefore more thematic game. See, random encounter tables have always been intended to give dungeon or game masters something quick to add flavour to their sessions at the table, something to remind the characters that they're delving in a world that's alive and kicking and dangerous, so much so that at any given moment, if they're not alert, they might blunder into something they least expect. But if the idea is to add an encounter quickly, to me this has always seemed at odds with the theory that to surprise and delight your players, particularly more seasoned ones, pretty much all the encounters you lay before your players should be laced with conflict and decision points and dramatic questions, should relate thematically to your setting or campaign, and therefore make some kind of sense to your players and build up the immersion. Don't get me wrong, rolling up 2d4 wolves might be fun. I get that. It's the reason that for each random encounter card deck I create, I also tend to roll up a bare bones version called The Quickening that locks you in with the pure chaos theory of the game, a shorter burst of inspiration. But what if those wolves aren't simply after their dinner? What if they've been controlled magically to seek out something the party holds dear? What if the party meet those wolves in a terrain that begins to shift beneath them during the battle? What if other enemies appear as they fight? What if the wolves stand between the party and a friendly non-player character who's dangling on the edge of a cliff or about to fall off? What if, after defeating the wolves, instead of crashing to the ground, the wolves turn to ash, which reforms in the air into a terrifying ethereal being? And if in your futuristic encounter table you roll up a street fixer offers you cyberware, that alone might not give you much to work with. But what if the street fixer knows that the cyberware's rigged? What if they're having to sell off their own cyberware to pay the bills, but still desperately need it to survive? What if someone else is bidding for it when the group comes along, and that someone else is known to the group, relevant to one of their backstories? I've found that even though rolling in these random encounter tables might let me access the actors in the encounter, in other words, the monsters or NPCs or loot the party might face, as the dungeon or game master, I've still needed to work out how to make the encounter feel less like a sagging punch bag stapled with yet another face, something that's more enticing, packed with flavour, relevance, immersion. And that takes work and time, which, as I say, takes away from the theory of the tables shaking things up at speed. And so, if your players crave from you the fun of intricate layered drama, how fair is it on you as dungeon or game master to have to pull that off when all you're given behind your screen is 2d4 wolves? But fleshing out things on the fly, continuously maintaining immersion, rolling with the spectre of chaos whenever it creeps up behind you in your game sessions, does that always come easy to you? We've talked a little about random encounters, about why use of them in your game can introduce an element of chaos, can help separate your game from playing a game in the PC or console, from reading a book, even if it's one where you can choose your own path. In terms of chaos theory in gaming, of learning how to grasp it with confidence, a great many publications talk about the importance of improvisation, about honing comfort in the creation of magic off the cuff in your game. You might have read about yes and or no but techniques, those old generalised chestnuts. Although those kind of techniques can take you a certain way along the path, you might also have read that, as with a great many other things in life, really the answer on improving an improv lies in experience, in the sheer number of hours and sessions in which you're left having to decide over and over again about what happens next, and who says what, and whether this rule applies or on how to interpret it. And of course, on learning that if you make a mistake or get stuck in those headlights, really, it ain't the end of the world. The more you play, the more refined and comfortable you'll get, usually. But in role-playing particularly, my theory's always been that to help that along, learning how to structure and lay out random encounters in your game is by far the most instrumental, most helpful method to unlocking safely that dart trap door into the dungeon of comfort with improvisation. Why is that? Well, it's down to what I've been talking about. Randomness lies at the very heart of this game you're playing. Once you become down to the bone familiar with the premise that when everyone sits down at the table, no matter whether you're a player or a dungeon or game master, not one soul at that table should have certainty about what's to happen in the session. That's when you'll have reached into the heart of your game and felt it beating. That's when it'll all fall in place for you. But to get there, first you need a solid structure to leap off. Moreover, you need to embrace the freedom to reshape that structure until it feels more solid under your feet. And so that structure begins with the game rules you're playing, with an understanding that your group is far from constrained by those rules, that it's absolutely free to do whatever it takes with them to drive forward the shared narrative you all desire. See, when it comes to improv, what you'll find, in fact, is that it's underpinned over the years the very core evolution of role-playing games. Without collaborative improvisation as tabletop wargaming and role-playing developed, without the embracement of random chaos and variation built on existing structures, these games you play and how you play them would look entirely different. As Michael Corns made clear in Modern War in Miniature 1966, in role-play games, there is only one rule: to simulate reality. Although the rules of the game and its statistics and tables are designed to help with that simulation, when they get in the way, then you should discard them in favour of any procedure that better simulates reality. By simulate reality, Corns didn't mean making your game feel like real life. He was thinking more about the importance in your sessions of maintaining immersion, verisimilitude, an experience that, even though you're playing out a narrative grounded in fantasy or sci-fi and the like, it feels real because everything kind of makes sense in the world. From the 1970s, this theorised freedom and encouragement to reinvent, to better simulate reality by improvising your games beyond what your plans and the structured game rules might dictate, pretty much matured into an absolute necessity, not least given the notoriously, but purposely, vague guideline framework introduced in Chainmail in the first edition of D&D. Unlike as it was in earlier war games, the bare bones of all these new role-playing games being developed lent themselves more and more towards playability over simulation of reality. and explicitly encouraged the community to roll initiative and adapt, to grab that latitude and develop unprecedented playstyles in which interpretation and random improvisation on the fly ended up becoming almost an expectation around the table. Players noting down in pencil the house rules they would all revise and devise in each and every session of randomly generated scenarios, as they sought to wriggle free from the rigid structure of the board games and word games they'd been used to up till that point, and to begin weaving together from the looser framework of these strange new games more of a collaborative, intricately character-driven story. Since the role-playing hobby began springing to life in the 1970s, therefore, and in all the years beyond right up to this very day, referees and players have always been encouraged to carve out, from the gaming structures they're given, their own house rules, their own improvised random moments and more. As we've seen, D&D laid out a framework. From the very first day it was released into the wild, that framework has been, and is still being, carved and chopped and repurposed into so many variants that we've ended up with an industry in which the only real difference between all those shiny published role-playing games and modules you now see on the shelf, and with the private house rules and moments that you and I pencil out each and every week around our tables, is mere motivation and the money to get them printed. Beginning way back in ye olde times, encouraged by Gygax himself, you'd find groups running D&D games using rules for RuneQuest. You'd see Vancian magic being swapped out with a Warlock spell point system. You'd witness Donald Saxman's 1977 sci-fi game Superhero 44 being adapted from a heavily varied home game of D&D. And it's still going on. Groups who sprinkle into their sessions house rules that very likely would make absolutely no sense to other groups. Bits and bobs added or tweaked or chucked in the trash, even in the moment, are applicable for one session only. So many great memories, maybe when someone forgot to bring the rules with them, or where we'd decided last minute in the woods to sit down and play a game, when if no one could remember the wording or interpretation of a certain rule, we'd just hash it out quickly and make up an agreed rule on the spot. So we'd be making up new rules there and then, but we all knew we were still playing D&D or Star Trek or whatever. Because all that mattered was, and what still matters is, the improvisation in the moment. The end result of that shared narrative within which we all look to immerse ourselves. Bobby makes a statement of intention for their character. Sounds like it'll be so cool if it plays out well. Everyone at the table's crossing fingers and toes that Bobby's character pulls off this amazing move. Then Bobby rolls a 2. Looks deflated. Shoulders sag. But you know what? The mechanics say no, while the rest of us say hells yeah. The GM's like, okay, it was pretty clear what you were hoping to achieve there. So tell me, how do you think you somehow managed to turn such a foul up into something awesome? And hey presto, in that moment, you and your group have become game designers. You've acted within the game system you're playing, bending the rules around your collective imagination rather than the other way around. And yep, like so many gaming groups before and after you, and like all those who've gone on to form companies to make entirely new systems out of moments and discussions like this, you've just created a new variant rule, one that opens the door to let cool player narrative beat a poor dice roll if the group allows it. You're still playing the same game system everyone else is playing, but in that group, in that moment, you've discarded or varied a rule to better simulate reality, but moreover, to enhance playability. And that's okay. No matter whether you love D&D or shout proudly from the rooftops about how it bears no relevance to your life, like actually no one cool plays that these days. Whatever game you're running these days lends its roots to those formative days of improvised variation from an existing rule structure. Roots that continue to breathe life into every session you play regardless of the system beneath it. You might have picked up a game and thought, hey, I've paid a fair wedge for this, so why should I still need to homebrew? Why isn't it exactly what I need all in one book? But that's how the hobby's always been. As a dungeon or game master, this hobby you're playing, no matter the game, wants you to switch things up, to tweak its knobs and twist its dials until it hits just the right note for you and your groups. It gives you this historically and continually varied framework in which to improvise. Because that's how games evolve. That's how you breathe life into the game structures you're given and into the sessions you lay out. And that's why you should never have any qualms about taking the structure of a system and making it as flexible as a springboard to jump off more confidently into the unknown. You might think you need to stick to the rules of the system you're playing, but the game and all its rules know better than you how to run your sessions. But although it's better first to test out a system as written before you rip out its guts, game designers have always encouraged you to improvise, to take what's written and ask, you know what, can we tweak that to make it work better? Look at RuneQuest. Right there in black and white, the game's encouraging you to grab from the mechanics those portions you can use and ignore the rest. Like any fantasy roleplay system, these can only be guidelines. Use them as you will. So you need to trust yourself in this. Beyond a lack of interest maybe in sharing with others your own group's rules and gaming moments and ideas and more, you're absolutely no different from all those corporates and creatives you might think know more than you do, who manage to pool or crowdfund their resources to publish their games. Just as you can and likely will in your home games, those corporates and creatives are merely collaboratively improvising their own systems, their own preferred ways of playing. Based on their own experiences around their tables, they've improvised and reshaped and playtested rules they don't like, and merged them with rules they do like to create something different. They've tried something else that fits what works for them, what adds enjoyment to their table. And then all they've done is to share that with the world, giving you a new structure to run with that can trace its roots all the way back to those wacky origins of role-playing, a structure that you can then take and improvise and vary yourself again and again to fit your own group style. And right there at the centre of all that creation, of all that variation, is usually a wish to end up with a structure, that system and style of play, no matter what it calls itself in the front cover, which will help your group to improvise more easily in the moment, with everyone aware that the system's still there to keep things in check, and to focus more on the intended theme and shared narrative of the game than in getting overly caught up in the rules needed to play it. I mean, yeah, there are still plenty of players out there who do like to crunch the numbers in their games, and who prefer to get down into the nitty-gritty of simulating reality more closely, zeroing in on what needs rolled and mathed to find out by how much a character's shoulder plate or their spiked armour has been dented by this arc of a thrust of a particular weapon wielded by that broken-handed foe underneath that large building that's collapsing at this degree of angle and the like. And again, that's okay. But if you prefer to interact less with the rules and more with the others around the table, if you prefer focusing more on the free flow of moments, on narrative over system, then yeah, following the tradition of all those role-playing game designers who've come before you, and of all those who will come after, it might prove helpful for you to grow more comfortable accepting the game as a mere framework you can bend and shape around you and your group style of play, until that framework opens the door more easily into an open world filled with improvisation. It ain't easy to improvise, I get that. But yeah, the evolutionary foundation of this game you play, it's got your back. That framework premise on which it's been designed wants you to flesh it out with imagination. It wants you to be fearless as you imagine and improvise your way beyond any perceived constraints of the system you're playing. And so, just as it is with whatever game resources you have by your side, building onto that framework foundation an easy-to-follow, structured formula designed to help you tap more assuredly into the chaos of randomness in whatever game you play, can leave you with a solid platform under your feet from which to delve confidently into the unknown, in the knowledge that will be there to return home to again and again if ever you need it. All you need, therefore, before you take that first step, is to feel out and grow more comfortable with that structure under your feet, that easy-to-follow formula, no matter the system you're playing, and that's what will help you do here. And once you're there, once you've ingrained the feeling of that structure and got to the point of comfort with improv, you won't look back. No longer constrained by mechanics, you begin to grow more confident making and sharing collaborative variations and calls on the system rules you're playing. You begin to think of game preparation as something you do for fun, not merely as a slog, as a never-ending struggle and stress to finesse your way around what the players might do or say in each and every moment. You begin to prepare by focusing more on the presentation of encounters rather than the consequences, because that's just what comes next. That's what will unfold only after the players have interacted with the encounters you've laid out. And from there, rather than planning everything out in advance because that's what makes you feel safe and confident, you begin to think more seriously about the bigger picture in your game only once your players and your group have painted enough of it with what's happened at the table. Trust me, taking all this theory and getting it ingrained by practice, it will serve you so well and will enrich your games to come in ways you could only have imagined. Or yeah, at least that's the theory anyway. let's see how you get on with the application and you can take it from there. So okay, let's boil all this down into a nice stew for you to munch on. Whichever game you're running, it needs its rules and mechanics. It needs to assign roles to the dungeon or game master and to the players. It needs everyone at the table collaborating to create an experience, the story of which will live on in their memories as they were equally crucial in its development. And to make the game breathe, it also needs chaos. It needs chaos to remind everyone around the table that they're each at its mercy. It needs chaos to separate the experience from reading a book, from watching a movie, from playing a pre-programmed RPG. But here's the thing about chaos. Unless you're some deity sitting on a cloud, or unless you spend most of your days pondering theory in the quantum realm, it might be reassuring for you to accept the simpler premise that something can't come from nothing. And so chaos isn't born in a vacuum. It comes from something. In the game, it comes from each and every interaction in the setting by the players and the dungeon or game master. It comes from the decisions they make, decisions that change the setting and its inhabitants in complex ways. So for chaos to exist, before all else there needs to be a setting. And that setting needs to have inhabitants. And that setting needs to live and breathe before and during and after the players and the dungeon or game master begin to change it with all their decisions. And how can you help everyone feel that setting live and breathe? Enter random encounters. Cook them well, blend them into your setting as randomly as you like, and the taste will delight you and the players for years to come. In the next part, I'll be sharing with you some techniques, some ideas as you try and think about and present random encounters in your game. And the reason I'll be doing that is that if you can master the presentation of random encounters, you'll have taken the first step towards understanding and mastering chaos in all other aspects in your game. So I hope to see you next time. Thanks again for listening, watching, subscribing, liking, and I'll see you next time.